Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 58 of Contemplating Life, Oscar Edition. The 96th Annual Academy Awards are just a few days away as I'm writing this, and we still have 4 more Best Picture nominees and 2 episodes to cover them. We've saved some of the best for last. When I came up with the idea of grouping the Best Picture nominees into pairs, I didn't have all 5 pairs figured out. But now that we're down to the end, my little gimmick of grouping the films in twos has worked out much better than I thought it would. This week's grouping is called Genocidal Husbands. We have 2 films about marriages in which the husbands engaged in rampant, racist murder of people based on their ethnic background. It's strange that we would have 2 such films in the same year. The first one is The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer. It's the story of Rudolf Hess, who was the commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camps. He and his wife Hedwig live in a spacious villa with a huge garden that includes a swimming pool, a greenhouse, and a stable for his horses. The other side of the tall garden wall is the camp where Jewish prisoners are sorted. Those capable of working are sent to local factories as slave labor. Those who are too weak are killed in gas chambers and the bodies burned in furnaces. Although this is a British production by a British director, the entire film is in German with English subtitles. The film does not show us the horrors going on in the camp, but we hear them quite vividly. From time to time, you hear screaming and occasional gunfire as unruly prisoners are eliminated. There's only one brief scene at the camp itself, and the camera stays focused closely on the face of Hess as he oversees the unloading of a trainload of prisoners. We hear the screaming of men, women, and children, and again occasional gunfire dealing with those who are uncooperative. The majority of the film simply shows us the day-to-day happy life of this couple who enjoy the benefits of his position. The renovation of their house and the construction of the garden and other outbuildings were all performed by or paid by local businessmen as a kickback for the slave labor from the camp. In one scene, Hess meets with a pair of contractors who've come up with a more efficient design for the furnaces. They talk about it so casually. Hess and his wife have 4 children, ranging from an infant up to a teenage boy. Their eldest son enjoys playing with his collection of gold teeth that have been extracted from the prisoners. Hedwig enjoys receiving fine fur coats and jewelry stolen from the Jews, and she distributes other lesser quality pieces of clothing to their household servants. The family enjoys picnicking, fishing, and swimming in the nearby river. However, one day the river is polluted by ash and human remains. Rudolph has to scurry out of the river where he's fishing and get his children out of the water quickly to run home and be scrubbed vigorously with hot water. The movie was filmed using remotely operated hidden digital cameras placed around the house and grounds so that the actors would not be distracted by them. There are no movie lights used. Everything is shot digitally with natural lighting. They would act out long scenes, and they would be unaware of what part of the scene the cameras were focused on. The actors said that it made their performance more natural because they didn't have to worry about hitting their marks. They just played out the scene. Except for one scene, I don't recall seeing any close-ups in the film. During conversations, there is little or no back-and-forth editing between the participants. The cameras are static. In one particular scene, While Rudolph is discussing the new furnaces in his office with the contractors, Hedwig is entertaining her friends, and a Polish servant girl scurries around the house, serving drinks and collecting the commandant's bloody boots to be cleaned by another servant. The scene was filmed with 10 remotely controlled cameras in fixed locations, and it's all edited together to follow the servant girl as she wanders between the rooms. It's as if all of this is happening in real time, and we are voyeuristically watching it unfold. I've linked a YouTube video about the filming of that particular scene. It's really fascinating. The actual Haas home still exists in Poland, adjacent to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum and Memorial. Director Jonathan Glazer visited the museum and spent years researching the film, including material from the museum's archives. This included written testimony and interviews of the actual servants who worked in the home. The movie is filmed on location in Poland, just a few hundred yards from the actual home. They found an appropriate abandoned home and renovated it, and then spent months to recreate the garden, which is meticulously identical to the original. The Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum was cooperative in the production, and there's an epilogue scene filmed in the museum. I've linked the Museum Memorial website in the description. There's very little plot to the film. We're simply a fly on the wall, witnessing the normality of these deeply evil people. The only plot point occurs about halfway through the film, when Rudolph is assigned to a new position in the Nazi hierarchy. He delays telling his wife about the move for over a week, which upsets her greatly. She's worked to create this idyllic garden behind the house, and to create a luxurious life for her, her husband, and their children. She begs him to allow her to stay in the home as he travels to his new assignment. He petitions his superiors to allow her to stay behind, and they agree. One of the servants whose testimony is in the museum archives was the source of the information that the couple had argued over this incident, so it is entirely authentic to what it was really like in the Haas household. Eventually, Hitler approves a new plan to bring 700,000 Jews from Hungary to the camps in Poland for extermination and war production. Hess will be returning home to his wife and family to supervise the massive new importation of Jews. Himmler described it as Operation Hess. Rudolph excitedly calls his wife to share the good news. She's mildly happy, but ultimately she just complains that he called her so late at night. Couldn't this have waited? And basically, that's it. That's the movie in a nutshell. I've summarized the entire plot. There is no action, per se. We just witness the casual approach that these people have to living next door to evil and supervising it. Fortunately, the film only lasts an hour and 45 minutes, and that is more than enough time for it to make its point. Rudolph is played by German actor Christian Friedel, who was unknown to me, and his IMDb listings don't show anything that I recognize. Sandra Hüller was similarly unknown to me until I saw her in this year's nominated film, Anatomy of a Fall. Both of them deliver chilling performances, although it's a bit difficult to judge their performance with a lack of close-up shots. The film has 5 Oscar nominations. In addition to Best Picture, it's also nominated for Best Foreign Film and Best Director, Jonathan Glazer. It's also nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay by Jonathan Glazer, very loosely based on the novel of the same name by Sir Martin Amis. Sadly, Amis died the same day that the film made its debut at the Cannes Film Festival, where it was awarded the grand prize of the festival. And none of those Oscar nominations are likely to win in the face of stiff competition. However, it's also nominated for Best Sound, and although I've not looked up what the other films are nominated in that category, it should definitely win. The entire premise of the film is that you hear the horror but do not see it. By the way, it was easy for the actors to ignore those sounds because they were added in post-production, so they didn't hear the sound effects of people dying or being shot during the shooting of the film. It was nominated for 9 BAFTA awards, and it won the Best British Film of the Year and the Best Film Not in the English Language, and of course, the BAFTA for Best Sound. It was also nominated for 3 Golden Globe Awards. IMDb lists 158 nominations and 51 wins. The film has earned just over $7 million in the U.S. and Canada and $16.5 million worldwide. For the most part, the film is an impossible pain to watch. But then again, that's the point, isn't it? It's quite strange that a film can be simultaneously boring and horrifying. It's an amazing piece of filmmaking, and I understand why it received its nominations. I think they're all well-deserved, but I cannot recommend the film. Although I'm glad I saw it, and I'm fascinated by the way it was produced, it's my least favorite of the 10 Best Picture nominated films. In our second film this episode, we get a different look at genocide, this time a little closer to home. Martin Scorsese directs Killers of the Flower Moon. It's based on the true story of the Osage Native American tribe in Oklahoma in the 1920s, who discovered oil on their lands. Then one by one, they are killed off by white people in an attempt to steal their oil rights. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Ernest Burkhart, a young man who returns home to Oklahoma after serving as a cook in the Army during World War I. He is taken under the wing of his uncle, William Hale, played by Robert De Niro. Hale goes by the nickname King, and he's a wealthy rancher in the area who is very powerful in the nearby town of Fairfax. Ernest is unable to perform manual labor because of a hernia condition, but King finds work for him as a driver. The Osage people have become extremely wealthy, and Ernest finds employment driving around an Osage woman named Molly. At Uncle King's encouragement, Ernest courts and eventually weds Molly, thus making him a partial heir to her oil rights. King is the leader of a conspiracy to kill off the Osage oil rights holders one by one. Some are simply murdered in cold blood, some fall victim to accidents, some are staged suicides. Whenever possible, the powerful white men try to marry in to the Osage families so that the rights would eventually fall to them. The story jumps in time in several places as we see Ernest and Molly begin to raise the family. Molly suffers from severe diabetes, and King and her doctors arrange for her to be given insulin treatments, which are a brand new therapy during the time the story takes place. King claims to love the Osage people and befriends many of them, and the Osage, for the most part, believe that he's their friend. The tribal council hires private investigators because the local authorities will not investigate the deaths of the oil rights holders. The investigators mysteriously disappear. Eventually, they send a representative to Washington, D.C. to request that the federal government investigate the deaths. For some reason, he never arrives. Then Molly joins a large Osage delegation, who travel to D.C. themselves and insist on being seen by someone who will investigate the deaths. D.C. eventually sends investigators. King insists that Ernest get his wife under control and keep her from being such a troublemaker. They end up adding drugs to her insulin injections to keep her in a drug-induced stupor. Members of Molly's family are gradually killed off. Ernest serves as the go-between between King and the various suckers that they get to commit the murders. Ernest begins to realize that at some point his wife is going to be next, even though he's been on board with the plan all along. He truly loves his wife and doesn't want to lose her or leave his children motherless. So what will Ernest do? Does he dare stand up to his powerful uncle and the other powerful white men of the community and testify against them? If he does so, he will naturally have to reveal his role in the conspiracy. While that might save the life of his wife, it will in all likelihood destroy their relationship when his involvement becomes public. DiCaprio does a wonderful job of portraying this man who participates in such evil acts, yet grows a conscience when he realizes the evil is eventually going to target his immediate family. You feel every bit of his struggle with his conscience. You feel he really loves his wife, but he feels bound by loyalty to his powerful uncle. It's an amazing performance, and his Oscar nomination as lead actor is very much deserved. De Niro, of course, turns in a phenomenal performance as the sly and duplicitous kingpin of the entire plot. He's nominated for an Oscar for a supporting actor, as he should be. Molly is played by Native American actress Lily Gladstone. She's the first Native American nominated for a lead role, and would make more history if she should win. She won the Golden Globe for lead actress in a drama, as well as the SAG Award for lead actress. I think Emma Stone, who won the Golden Globe for lead actress in a comedy, probably is the favorite, but the Academy might not be able to resist the opportunity to make history. This one's pretty much a toss-up. I can't tell you who's going to win. While Gladstone's performance was probably my least favorite of the 5 nominees, I will grant that it was worthy of the nomination. I would not bump her to make room for Margot Robbie in Barbie or Natalie Portman in May December, both of whom gave amazing performances, but were not nominated. I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you that we do find out what decision Ernest makes, and we find the consequences of that decision. I won't tell you what it is. However, how that information is presented is a bit strange. There's sort of an epilogue in the form of a radio drama that we see performed on a theater stage in front of an audience. It's sort of a 1930s version of a true crime podcast in which actors and a narrator tell the story of what happened. Scorsese himself makes a cameo appearance in the radio play. Well, it was good to see how the story wrapped up, and I was satisfied with the ending. I found that epilogue in the form of a radio play to be a bit bizarre. I think I might have preferred an ordinary montage sequence with some voiceover narration. The film has earned 10 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Director for Martin Scorsese, Lead Actress Lily Gladstone, Lead Actor Leonardo DiCaprio, Supporting Actor Robert De Niro, Production Design, Costume Design, and Cinematography, all of which are very much well deserved. It was also nominated for the musical score, and for a song that I don't particularly remember, and for film editing, none of which I have an opinion about. It received 9 BAFTA nominations and 7 Golden Globe nominations. As you might expect from a Martin Scorsese epic, its runtime is 3 hours 26 minutes. Yet the pacing does not feel particularly slow. It was produced on an estimated budget of $200 million. It earned $68 million in the U.S. and Canada, and over $156 million worldwide. Yet it was made for Apple TV Plus streaming, so it's difficult to say if it turned a profit or not, depending on how much Apple contributed. Those numbers don't show up in the box office. It's my 6th favorite of the 10 best pictures. I found it engaging and well worth my time. It's everything you expect from people like Scorsese, DiCaprio, and De Niro. You can't go wrong with a trio like that. I highly recommend it. It's still playing in some theaters and is currently available for streaming on Apple TV Plus and for rent or purchase on Amazon and YouTube. After doing all of the editing on this episode, I have one more thought to share. On a channel called Native Media Theory, Native American Elias Gold gives an in-depth review of the film from an indigenous perspective. He has some interesting insights. He talks about the complaints that not enough of the film was told from the Native American perspective. It was all about Ernest and King Hale, and not so much about Molly and her family. But he reveals that the book and the original screenplay told the story strictly from the point of view of the FBI agents who came into the town to investigate after all the killing. So the film is much more representative of the indigenous view than the book was. So Scorsese has really stepped up in that regard by telling a much more interesting and more balanced story than he would have otherwise if he stuck to the original book. He also supposes that this film wasn't made for an indigenous population. It was made for white people, so that we can take a hard look at our own biases and look at how many people in the film were complicit in what was going on, even if they weren't actively participating. The same thing could be said for the other film, The Zone of Interest. There were thousands of people who knew what was going on in the camps, but remained silent and thus complicit. So both Jonathan Glazer in Zone of Interest and Martin Scorsese in Killers of the Flower Moon are asking us, in what ways are we complicit by our silence about the racism that still exists in the world today? Some things to think about. I've linked Mr. Gold's YouTube video in the description, and I highly recommend that you watch it. It gives an interesting perspective from an indigenous person. So, that wraps up our look at Genocidal Husbands. I still think it's bizarre that we even have such a category, but I think the phrase is applicable to both of these films. In our next episode, I'll present the final 2 of the 10 films nominated for Best Picture, and they are among the best of the best. We have a pair of biopics about amazing geniuses. Christopher Nolan gives us a fascinating look at physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the efforts to develop the first atomic bomb, in his film Oppenheimer. And a bit of a spoiler, my favorite film of the year is Bradley Cooper, directing and starring in Maestro, the story of famed composer-conductor Leonard Bernstein. At the end of our final episode in this series, I will have a brief recap of all 10 Best Picture films, as well as the 20 lead and supporting actors and actresses, as well as the 10 nominated screenplays. I'll recap my favorites in order, and then I'll pick who I think will win, even though I don't always agree with who is likely to win. If you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, in the way that I found many of these movies, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You'll get early access to the podcast and other exclusive content. Although finances are tight, I don't do it for the money. But then again, every little bit helps. As always, my deepest thanks to my financial supporters. I appreciate that you support what I'm doing, and I'll never be able to express how much that means to me. Even if you cannot provide financial support, please post links and share the podcast on social media so I can grow my audience. I just want more people to hear my stories. You can check out any of my back episodes, including the previous episodes in this series, wherever you found this episode. If you have any comments, questions, or other feedback, please feel free to comment on any of the platforms where you found the podcast. Tell me what you liked or did not like about any of these films. Do you plan to see any of them? I'll see you next week as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.